Sir, is my screen visible?
Very much.
Yes, very well.
Yes, yes. Sir. Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Kshitij Gandhi, and I am going to present a paper on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the spectrum of ocular trauma during Diwali at a tertiary eye care center of Western India. During this festival of lights, there is a surge in the number of patients with ocular trauma, especially the firecracker injuries presenting to the hospital. Although during the COVID-19 pandemic, people were expected to have restricted and muted celebrations of this festival with social distancing due to fear of infection as well as the government legislations. While a few studies have reported firecracker injuries, there is no study to the best of our knowledge presenting the spectrum of ocular trauma during Diwali from Western India, especially in COVID era. The purpose of our study was to evaluate the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on demographic and clinical spectrum of ocular trauma presenting in Diwali festival at Tertiary Eye Care Center of Western India. This retrospective observational and comparative study included a total of 163 eyes of 138 patients, where we will name them as DPC or pre-COVID Diwali 2019 from 25th to 29th October 2019 and DCP or the COVID Diwali period from 12th November to 16th November 2020. The data was divided on basis of age, gender, laterality, type of injury, user or bystander, and ocular examination, including visual acuity, slit lamp assessment, IOP measurement, fundus, USG, X-ray orbit, CT scan, as and when indicated on presentation was done. The injuries were classified according to the BETS classification, Birmingham Eye Trauma Terminology System, as well as the type of management, surgical and conservative, was seen. Ethical clearance and informed consent of the participants was obtained. According to the results, we were able to see a 26.38% decline in the number of emergency ocular trauma cases presenting during the DCP, that is COVID period. In terms of the age groups, you could see that the age group in 0 to 14 and 15 to 50 years, the youth were more common than more than 50 years who were afraid of socializing as well as due to the fear of spread of infection, which was seen more commonly in older age groups and more severe. Gender distribution followed a similar trend, showing males more than females, as females were busy with household work, as well as the males were more outgoing in our study. In terms of visits, we got more referrals than the primary visits, as ours is a tertiary primary care center. In terms of laterality, this year during the COVID period, bilateral presentation was more common than the COVID period, as well as right eye and left eye involvement was seen. The mean duration of presentation increased from 5.24 hours to 7.26 hours, owing to the fact that transportation facilities were hampered during the pandemic, as well as the curfew restrictions and government legislations. We also divided BETS classification, the type of injury, based on open globe and closed globe injuries. And the cause of trauma was most commonly due to firecracker injuries, followed by road traffic accidents. Household work related and occupational work related was the least involved, owing to the fact that work from home was more common during this period. We could see the trend of day 3 and day 4 cases being more during the days of Diwali, owing to the fact that day 3 is the main Diwali festival and day 4 is celebrated as New Year in Gujarat, in our Western India. The type of firecracker injury was most commonly caused by bomb, owing to its severity. In terms of ocular involvement, in anterior segment involvement, ocular surface burns were most common, followed by lid tear. As you can see in the figures, the periocular burns with Dua's grade 5 ocular surface burns, as well as a combined eyebrow tear with upper lid marginal tear with Dua's grade 4 ocular burns can also be seen. Hyphema and cataract with aniridia could also be seen. In terms of posterior segment involvement, vitreous hemorrhage was most common during both periods, the pre-COVID and COVID period, followed by macular edema and choroidal rupture. This study is one of a kind in terms of the reporting the entire spectrum of ocular trauma, ranging from firecracker injuries outside to household work injuries inside, as well as occupational hazards. A decrease in total number of cases of ocular trauma was seen during the COVID period, which could suggest that the government legislations did have some effect. However, the age group showed a similar trend in both the years, showing youth involvement more than the older patients involved. In terms of gender, male more than female were seen. Lesser workplace injuries owing to the fact that more work from home and even shops and many other industries were shut down during this period. More on day 3 and day 4 due to Diwali and New Year being celebrated. We could observe lesser surgical intervention, particularly during the COVID period rather than the pre-COVID period, owing to the fact of fear of spread of infection, which even vaccine wasn't available there. As we can see in this data, conservative management increased from 55% to 75%, the figures in the brackets, during the COVID period, while surgical management decreased from 44.66 to 25%, which mostly involved lid tear repair, conjunctival tear repair, and corneal foreign body removal, highlighting the fact that firecracker injuries were more common. Limitations of this study was that it was retrospective in nature, as we only covered the 5 days of the 2 seasons of Diwali, and that too at a single tertiary care center. We also included non-infectious cases, and we were unable to confirm the visual outcome during both the eras due to it being a retrospective study. This resulted in an underestimation of the magnitude of the actual problem.
Only 10 seconds left now.
Yes, ma'am. To conclude, the current COVID-19 pandemic has considerable challenges in the delivery of emergency ophthalmic care. With people celebrating festivals like Diwali, in spite of the pandemic, there is a necessity to strictly enforce the existing legislation, as well as bring out new legislation for road safety and firework use. A safe, appropriate, coordinated triage management
Dr.
becomes
Kshitij, your
even
time
more
is up.
necessary. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. The references are as follows. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone.
Over to judges. Bhatti sir, Naina ma'am, Avinash sir.
Yes. Yeah. It was an interesting presentation, Dr. Kshitij. Small question that after the trauma patients came, how long did it take for you to take the patient in OT and do the needful, considering the COVID restrictions and the COVID test?
Usually, ma'am, in our center. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes,
because
why
I'm asking you, because the time lag in treatment is important.
Yes, ma'am.
Hence, I asked this.
Yes, ma'am. Usually, the trauma cases which presented, we usually had the facility of rapid antigen testing available in our facility, as well as RT-PCR. We took the swabs for rapid antigen as well as RT-PCR, and based on based on rapid test itself, we took the patients for OT. So usually there wasn't a very significant delay in taking the patients to OT. But yes, there could be a delay because owing to the fact that both the tests also took some time and the results also took some time.
Okay, because this can have impact on the results, and with the pre-COVID comparison, I think this is a significant factor.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
In the outcome, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, the delay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to ask you one question.
Yes, sir.
Basically, during this period, was there any lockdown?
Sir, in our state particularly, the lockdown, the curfew was still there, but according to the government guidelines, they were still allowed to burst the firecrackers from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Usually, there was a strict enforcing of this in most areas. However, we could see some guidelines not being followed and people starting early as well as ending late in areas where the police wasn't accessible. We saw cases even presenting later than this period from 8 to 10. And so we could judge that there was still some lack in enforcing these legislations.
Wanted to know a small thing.
Yes.
What is the exact correlation in the sense during Diwali time? This time, every people thought that they will not celebrate anything. So obviously, the number of people who were celebrating any festivals was less.
Yes,
so
sir.
Is it exact correlation of the ocular trauma with COVID? Means exactly, I am slightly in a dilemma. What exactly you wanted to prove? Like,
sir,
due to COVID, injuries have come down. What exactly?
Sir, we were actually expecting that the number of cases of ocular trauma due to firecracker injuries in particular would reduce significantly or would be next to none, owing to the fact that the restrictions were quite good. And if people had followed it more strictly, maybe we could have seen that in the data, the number of RTA would have been more than the firecracker injuries. This proved that during both the years, the trend still happened to be that the firecracker injuries were still more. And despite the lockdown, the restrictions, the fear of COVID-19, which was even relatively new then, the vaccine wasn't available then. We expected people to be more vigilant about this and less of firecracker injuries. However, this study proves that the firecracker injuries were still more, especially during day 3 and day 4, as seen in the data, showing that people were still more adherent to the traditions rather than being afraid of a widespread pandemic that had already been so fearful all over the world by then. This study was particularly done to see whether the COVID period had any impact on the reduction in the number of firecracker injuries out of the total ocular trauma. Of course, sir, as you said, the ocular trauma cases had decreased. However, the firecracker part was still a greater proportion in the overall ocular trauma cases, which was surprising for us. And therefore, this data became more significant for us.
Okay.
Did you also find any difference in the results of the intervention during the COVID period? That means, were the results of intervention better or worse? Why I'm asking this is because there must have been some delay because of your RT-PCR testing. So did it affect the results of the interventions?
Sir, one of the limitations of our study, as I said, is that we were unable to really confirm the ultimate visual outcome of the patients since we couldn't track them down after their primary intervention was done, and therefore were unable to track them for the long term, and the ultimate visual outcome was not exactly visible in this case. However, from the cases we did observe, we did see that usually since they were emergency cases like lid tear repair and conjunctival tear repair, the ultimate outcome, even in terms of healing, was significantly similar to the pre-COVID period. The delay might not exactly have caused a change in the infection rate. However, we could say that we still lack the perfect data to actually prove it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Chetej, please stop sharing your screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Gayatri?
Yes, ma'am.
You're the next to present. Please start sharing your screen.
Is my screen visible, ma'am?
Yes.
So very good morning, one and all. My topic for today is a case study of bilateral fungal endogenous endophthalmitis. I have no financial interests. I would like to begin by saying that endophthalmitis, as we all know, is a deadly intraocular infection that is affecting the inner coats of the eye with significant vitreous inflammation. And there are two sources of infection. One could be the exogenous and the endogenous. What I am focusing here is the endogenous route, where the infectious agent travels via the bloodstream. It multiplies in the choroid and it starts infiltrating the retina and spreads into the vitreous. It has usually associations with conditions like liver abscess, sinus infections, endogenous endocarditis, meningitis, and indwelling catheters. Endogenous endophthalmitis on a whole accounts for approximately 2 to 8% of all the cases of endophthalmitis, although a bilateral condition is rare and there is a significant paucity of information regarding such a condition. The etiology could be either bacterial or fungal, with fungal being my case study here, and the risk factors was of an immunocompromised state. When I say immunocompromised state, I mean by those people who are on chronic corticosteroid use, or they are suffering from some malignancy or some end-stage liver disease, or on steroid use for organ transplants, uncontrolled blood sugar levels and diabetes, IV drug users, indwelling catheters, and some dental procedures. So my study is a case report of a 32-year-old male who was recently detected with type 2 diabetes, and he was admitted for ureteric calculi, UTI, and ischiorectal abscess. He came, the physician treating him referred to us on this day 2 of his admission when he complained of bilateral diminution of vision over 1 month. So his routine workup was done that showed a leukocytosis, a urine aerobic culture showed Candida albicans. He was then started on broad spectrum antibiotics that included meropenem. After the urine culture came positive for the fungus, he was treated on fluconazole, and his blood sugar levels were actively and aggressively controlled on antidiabetics. His blood culture was negative when we did a blood culture for aerobic and anaerobic media. This we did to show if there was any other secondary organism. And as per the recent protocols, we did a COVID antigen test, which was negative. So this showed that although he was a diabetic, he was not yet having COVID, which was a significant surprise for us owing to the way of spread it is. So we did his ophthalmic evaluation. We called him to our OPD and we examined his visual acuity, which in the right eye was a finger counting up to 2 meters. And in the left eye, he had a considerable vision loss with hand movements close to face and PR accurate in all the quadrants. Both eyes had an anterior segment exam within normal limits. The pupil in the right eye had a few posterior synechiae. It was irregular and reacting to light, while the left eye was fine. It was reacting to light. The posterior segment had a vitreous grade 4, and there was no view of the retina. So we started him on ophthalmic management that included topical medications of moxifloxacin eye drops QID, voriconazole eye drops QID, and atropine eye drops BD. We then immediately roped him for a pars plana vitrectomy with intravitreal antibiotics that included the standard antibiotics, namely Vanco, Cefta, and voriconazole. We then sent a vitreous tap during the surgery for microbiological examination that included gram, KOH, aerobic, and fungal culture. Now, surprisingly, the vitreous tap also showed budding yeast with pseudohyphae and Candida albicans on KOH. So we confirmed that the source of infection, which was Candida in the urine culture, had probably spread via the bloodstream to the eye, and it was a fungal endophthalmitis. So the pars plana vitrectomy with a vitreous tap was a diagnostic as well as a therapeutic mode of assessment. 2 days later, we roped him for the right eye pars plana vitrectomy with intravitreal voriconazole injection this time, because we confirmed that this was Candida albicans. So preoperatively, we tried to get a fundus photograph, which showed a classical vitritis and fluffy white lesions. Now, this photograph was particularly difficult for us to take owing to the fact that he had an ischiorectal abscess. It was difficult for him to sit down and, actually take a fundus photo.
You have 1 minute left.
Yes, ma'am. So post-operatively, this is how it looked. We then controlled his controlled blood sugar levels and an IND of the ischiorectal abscess. He was then managed at afebrile conditions of IV antibiotics and given systemic management. We discharged him on topical voriconazole and nepophenic eye drops. The post-operative course showed his visual acuity of 6/36, which was a great relief and surprise for us. Now, the prognosis, as you all know, I've discussed, is an immunocompromised state. And the earlier the time of presentation, the better. The conclusion would be that
15 seconds left.
antibiotic injections and a daily response is to be recorded. Vitrectomy has to be done. It showed a subsequent low leukocyte count and reduced neutrophilia. Pars plana vitrectomy, as I discussed, and visual acuity showed etiology of infection, ocular
Your time is up, ma'am.
And so I would like to conclude by saying that ophthalmological screening is recommended for all patients with candidemia and septicemia for the early treatment and a better prognosis. These are my references. Thank you. Yes, ma'am, I'm done with my presentation.
Over to the judges, no?
Yeah. Gayatri, what is unusual in this case?
Ma'am, so the unusual thing that we found is a bilateral condition, which showed that the candida had spread widely via the bloodstream and it affected both the eyes simultaneously over the course of 1 month.
When the
Sorry, sir. Please go ahead.
when the ischiorectal abscess was drained, what did that show?
So that showed a part of E. coli and some Staph aureus.
So where do you think the candida came from that entered the eye?
So probably it came from the hematogenous route. He also had ureteric calculi, and so it was a hydronephrosis causing a backstream and then a hematogenous spread.
That means you postulate that there was candida in the kidneys.
Yes.
Is that usual?
No, sir.
Did you do blood culture? Was it
Yes,
done?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We did
Urine
a blood
culture, blood culture. What was the result?
Ma'am, the urine culture showed Candida albicans, 10⁵ colony forming units.
Yeah,
and
that
the
you
urine,
mentioned.
Yeah, and the urine culture, ma'am, we sent it for aerobic as well as anaerobic. We, however, didn't send it for fungal culture. I don't know actually what was the factor, but maybe they wanted to prove if there was any secondary bacterial infection. That is why they did a blood culture.
Okay.
Were there any specific ocular signs suggestive of endogenous endophthalmitis in this case?
Yes, sir. While operating, we noticed a stalk of fungus. Sorry.
During examination.
During examination.
Yeah.
Sir, nothing apart from the fact that the anterior segment was normal, and while examining, there were a few synechiae, and the posterior segment had a lot of vitreous haze, and the posterior pole wasn't clearly visible.
Any other questions from the judges?
No, thank you.
We'll move on to the next presentation. Dr. Shivani Hindocha, please start sharing your screen. Dr. Gayatri, please stop sharing your screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Gayatri, please stop sharing your screen.
Ma'am, I've paused it. I don't know how to. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Dr. Shivani, please start sharing your screen.
Dr.
Yes,
Shivani,
ma'am.
are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Fine.
Good morning, respected judges. I am Dr. Shivani Hindocha, first year resident at CH Nagri Eye Institute, Ahmedabad. My topic is analysis of tear film volume among patients of keratoconus and normal subjects. Keratoconus is a non-inflammatory disease characterized by progressive corneal thinning and apical protrusion. It is usually bilateral and usually affects patients in the second and the third decade, and it is generally progressive. It leads to mild to moderate visual impairment due to irregular astigmatism and progressive myopia. It creates disturbance in the cornea and the tear film layer, thereby inducing visual distortion and symptoms of ocular discomfort. The aim of our study was to compare the tear film stability and tear volume in patients of keratoconus and normal subjects of the same age group. It was a cross-sectional observational comparative study conducted over a period of 6 months. The sample size was 21 keratoconus patients and 35 normal subjects, conducted at a tertiary care institute at Ahmedabad. The inclusion criteria was patients with newly diagnosed keratoconus between the age group of 10 to 34 years having mild to moderate grades of keratoconus according to Amsler-Krumich classification, and similar age-matched normal subjects was taken as the control group. Patients with advanced keratoconus, corneal scar, any history of ocular surgery, any other corneal degeneration or dystrophy, and patients with systemic illnesses were excluded from the study. All the patients were assessed by taking a detailed history. Best corrected visual acuity was measured. Slit lamp biomicroscopy was assessed. Topography, tear film breakup time, Schirmer's test, and pachymetry was done. The diagnosis of keratoconus was made by at least one of the following slit lamp findings, which showed stromal thinning, conical protrusion at the cornea at the apex, Fleischer's ring, Vogt stria, or anterior stromal scar. Along with it, corneal topographic findings, which showed asymmetric bow tie pattern with or without skewed axis, inferior or corneal steepening, or mean keratometry values of more than 47 diopter, or inferior to superior IS values of more than 1.4 diopters. This is the Amsler-Krumich classification which were used, and the grade 4 keratoconus, which included refraction was not possible, corneal red eye of more than 55 diopters, patients with central scars or perforation, and thickness less than 200 micrometer were excluded. The tear film volume was measured by Schirmer's test as per standard protocol, and tear film stability was measured by fluorescein tear breakup time. The analysis showed that gender distribution was among the keratoconus group, 11 subjects were female, and 10 were male, while in the normative age group, 18 were male and 17 were female. The mean age of keratoconus subjects was 21.8 years, and in the normal age group, it was 21.6 years. 24 eyes had grade 1 keratoconus, 9 subjects had grade 2, and only 2 subjects had grade 3 keratoconus. This is the chart showing actual Schirmer's value in keratoconus and normal subjects, which was simplified in the tabular form, which showed that mean value among keratoconus group was 29.65, and in the normal age group, it was 32.42. This is the tear film breakup time in keratoconus and normal subjects, which was again simplified to show that the mean value in keratoconus group was 7.66, and in the normal age group, it was 10.11. The etiology of keratoconus has been largely investigated, but it is still unknown. Description of the qualitative and quantitative changes of the tear film may improve the management of keratoconus disease. In our study, majority of the patients had mild to moderate grades of keratoconus. The Schirmer test value in the normal eyes was 32.42, and in the keratoconus eyes, it was 29.65. We found significant difference in the Schirmer test values between both the groups, which showed p-value of 0.039. But as the Schirmer test value of greater than 15 mm is considered as normal, so it suggests that keratoconus eyes had good tear volume. The tear film breakup time of less than 10 seconds is considered as suggestive of dry eye. In keratoconus eyes, the mean value was 7.66 seconds, and in the normal, it was 10.11, which showed significant statistical difference, that is p-value of 0.014. So the quality of the tear film was significantly poor in the keratoconus patients. The review of literature showed similar results of the various studies conducted elsewhere all around the world. Thus, we could conclude from our study that patients with keratoconus had normal tear volume but had a reduced tear film stability as compared to patients without keratoconus. These are my references. Thank you.
Over to the judges.
Yes, Shivani.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me what prompted you to do this study?
Ma'am, because when we found the patient had a symptom, complaints of foreign body sensations and itching and all, so we would like to investigate whether there was any correlation in patients had dry eye and keratoconus. So
Okay. But don't you think that the keratoconus cone is responsible for early breakup time of the tear film? Because it's not a normal smooth surface.
yes, ma'am. So we only wanted to see whether there is any correlation found in our patients, and if we could see it is only due to dry eye as such has any etiology, or it was only due to keratoconus only.
Okay.
How would you postulate your finding of a significant reduction in both the quantity and the quality of the tears in keratoconus patients? Do you have any theory?
So the quantity was found normal only, but it
No,
was
it was normal, you said, but you also said there was a significant difference.
significant difference. According to p-value, we could find 0.039, so less than 0.05 it is. So we found as such significant difference. But when we
So
see the
that means compared to normal patients, there was a
Yes.
significant difference in the quality and the quantity, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so how would you postulate any reasons for that?
Because of the keratoconus, because of the apical protrusion, so the tear film, the patients had a low blinking rate, so they could find the tear film breakup time was found to be less.
So that means that would account, the cone would account for the tear film to break up quickly. But do you
Yes.
have any postulations for the amount of the tears being less than in normal people?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Why it should be less? Why it should be less, as you said? In a normal patient,
Yes,
you
ma'am.
said it is around 32.42.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
in the K-conus, you said 29.65. Why
Yes.
this difference is there in the quantity?
Ma'am,
Any idea?
it is not that much also difference. So
But you said it is statistically significant, right?
yes, ma'am.
So what do you have to say? Anything about this? Anything more?
Sorry, ma'am.
Yeah, the previous slide, yeah, you have it there,
Yes, ma'am.
right?
Yes. But as we have seen that 29.65 mm is a good tear volume. So it was not as such less Shermer's test values. So they had
Agreed.
clear good volume.
Agreed. But why still it is persistently less in K-conus patients comparatively? Fine.
Sorry.
Okay.
ma'am.
Okay.
No questions from my side. Thank you.
Done. Thank you, Shiva.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Shivani. Please stop sharing your screen. Next, we have Dr. Akanksha Pandit. Are you there, Dr. Akanksha? Dr. Akanksha,
Yes, ma'am.
please start sharing your screen.
Yes. Is it visible, ma'am?
Not yet.
Now, ma'am?
Not yet.
Uh,
Can somebody guide her? Any technical
ma'am, is it
person?
possible? Now is it seen?
No.
Who is, yeah.
Yes, it's there. It's there, Akansha. Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. Good morning, respected teachers. My topic, my case presentation is surgical management of ophthalmic complication of homocystinuria under the guidance of Dr. Vaman Sawan. Homocystinuria is an autosomal rare recessive disorder caused by an abnormality in the enzyme cystathione beta synthase. It decreases the enzymatic metabolism of methionine, leading to accumulation of methionine homocysteine in the body. Systemically, it developmental delay and thromboembolic predisposition, via secondary glaucoma, optic atrophy, and retinal detachment. A 14-year-old female known case of homocystinuria came with the chief complaints of diminution of vision in both eyes, right eye greater than the left eye, since the age of 6, photophobia since 4 months, pain in right eye since 15 days. Diminution of vision was gradual, progressive, and painless, and has aggravated in the past 4 months. History of use of spectacles since 5 years with frequent changes of glasses was noted. It was not associated with redness, diplopia, colored halos, nausea, vomiting. No history of ocular trauma or ocular surgery was there. No history of any cardiac ailment or recurrent fractures was seen. No similar complaints were there in the family. An uneventful birth history was noted. She was diagnosed with homocystinuria at the age of 8. Since then, she is on pyridoxine, folate, and cobalamin supplements once a day. Laboratory reports revealed high levels of homocysteine of 43 micromole per liter. On examination, her best corrected visual acuity in the right eye was finger counting 2 meters, while in the left eye it was 6/12. General, systemic, and anthropometric examination revealed normal findings. Ocular examination, her head posture was normal, ocular position was normal. Ocular movements were free, full, and painless in all direction of gaze. On slit lamp examination, megalocornea was noted with 15 mm of diameter in both the eyes. Anterior chamber has normal depth. Iridodonesis was noted. Pupil in the right eye was 4 to 5 mm, sluggishly reacting to light, while in the left eye it was normal. Lens was inferonasally subluxated in both the eyes. In the right eye, intermittent prolapse of lens in the anterior chamber was noted. Optic disc of right eye was had a cup disc ratio of 0.6 with nasal shifting of vessels, and rest was normal. The left eye disc was normal. This is the subluxated lens which we can see preoperatively. Her intraocular pressure in the right eye was noted as 24.4 millimeters of mercury, while in the left gonioscopy, narrow angle was noted in the right eye and open angle was in the left eye. Her B-scan axial lens showed right eye with 24.6 millimeters, while the left eye was 24.1 millimeter in length. Anterior segment OCT showed iris bowing in the right eye, which was suggestive of pupillary block glaucoma, and the left eye had a normal iris configuration. On investigation, homocysteine levels were were noted, which was 58 micromole per liter. Rest of the blood investigations were normal. Her chest X-ray and 2D echo were normal. Skeletal X-ray showed pes cavus and early osteoporotic changes were noted. During the surgery, her pre-treatment was done with dipyramidol, acid and adequate hydration, and patient was taken under general anesthesia. After performing the peritomy, scleral incision was taken superiorly. As the pupil was dilated, lens had already prolapsed in the anterior chamber. It was delivered using wire vectors, and thus an intracapsular cataract extraction was performed. Anterior vitrectomy was done using a 23-gauge cutter. 2 scleral pockets were made 2 mm away from the limbus at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, and scleral fixated intraocular lens implantation was done using modified Yamane technique. Main wound was closed with 3 non-absorbable sutures, while the scleral pockets were closed with 2 absorbable sutures. Post-operatively, patient was started on antibiotic, analgesic, and vitamin supplements. After examination on the first day, visual acuity was noted as finger counting 2 meters, with AC was well formed, cells 3+ and flare 2+ was noted, and lens was central. Topically, patient was started on corticosteroid, antibiotic eye drops, and artificial tears. Patient was examined on the day 3 and day 7 of post-operatively, and the inflammation gradually subsided and vision improved to 6/18. IOP was well controlled. Patient followed later on 15 day 1 month and regularly after up till a year. There was no complication when her vision slightly dropped to 6/24 on her 6-month visit. Discussion: homocystinuria, though a rare autosomal recessive disorder, ocular complications are crippling. Frequent changes in the refractive power of the eye makes conservative management with glasses and contact lenses difficult. Phacoemulsification with PCIOL implantation with capsular tension ring is the procedure of
You have 30
choice
seconds
with zonular dialysis lesser than 270 degree, while zonular dialysis greater than 270 degree is managed through SFIOL or iris fixated IOL. Phaco provides a closed chamber during surgery, leading to minimum pressure changes and reduces chances of vitreous prolapse, thus providing an advantage over SICS. Complete lens prolapse in the AC indicated
Your time
questionable
is up,
back
Dr.
stability,
Akanksha.
which is why the procedure chosen was ICCE with primary SFIOL. Concluding this case saying, early diagnosis and intervention in the condition will be beneficial. Surgical management of this case resulted.
Over to the judges.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Avinash, we can hear you.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask that I wanted to see that slide in which she has written the infranasal subluxation of the lens. When she has
Correct,
written some
correct.
IOL there.
IOL,
So,
she has mentioned IOL there.
yeah, it's okay. No
Already she
problem.
has mentioned in,
Yeah,
Can you go back to that, Akansha?
Yes, ma'am.
The slide which shows the anterior segment examination. I think is the 3rd or the 4th slide.
You need to share
Wherein
the screen again, Akansha. What madam is
Hanji,
go back.
because
yes, ma'am.
you have mentioned in the pre-op assessment that right eye has IOL. Right,
Sorry,
Dr.
ma'am.
Avinash?
Yeah.
Is it the same thing, Dr. Avinash, you are mentioning? Can you unmute yourself, Dr. Avinash?
sorry. I think the same thing I wanted to ask.
Right, because I too got confused.
Yeah.
Because she
yes.
showed the surgery later on, right?
Yes, ma'am. It's my mistake. It was lens and
Right.
not intraocular lens. It was the lens.
It was a natural lens,
Yes,
right?
ma'am. Lens.
Acha,
I have shown a photo over it.
Right. Doesn't matter. Now, tell me, what was the cause of photophobia in this patient? Okay. And
Hello,
one more thing you
ma'am, am I
mentioned
audible?
was- Yes, yes, Akansha, tell me.
Yes, ma'am. Can you please repeat the question?
No, you have also mentioned there the patient had photophobia.
Yes, ma'am.
So what was the cause of photophobia here?
Ma'am,
And
the
second question, finish it, right? Bolo.
Ma'am, the patient had subluxation, like the lens used to move forward and backward. So partially there was a aphakic area and a phakic area. So intermittently she used to have photophobia. Whenever the lens used to dislocate completely, she used to complain of photophobia. And whenever the lens used to be in a stable place, she did not have any complaints.
You have not mentioned about the zonules, Akansha. How will you differentiate from the other ectopia lentis patients?
Zonules, ma'am, right. In like in Marfan syndrome, if we consider, usually the zonules, like there is supero temporal subluxation of the lens, like the inferior zonules are weakened. But in homocystinuria, as the cystine is not there, like homocysteine to cystine conversion is not there, so the zonules itself are weak. So there is a degeneration of zonules present in
So
homocystinuria.
they are present or they are absent?
They are degenerated.
So they are present or they are not seen?
Absent. They're absent.
So that should have been mentioned.
Yes,
And you have also mentioned that there was megalocornea,
yes,
15
ma'am.
millimeters.
Yes, ma'am.
So why there was megalocornea? Is it known?
Actually, megalocornea is present in Marfan syndrome, but in this case, we observed megalocornea.
So the cornea was clear?
Yes,
Was
ma'am.
it the
It was.
cause of photophobia with pressures more than 24 millimeters of mercury?
Yes, ma'am. Initially, it was. But later the cornea was clear, so there was no reason for any cause of photophobia. Only in initial days, like when she had come to us, only that time she had photophobia, and that too intermittently.
Okay. One last question from me. The patient was taken under GA.
Yes, ma'am.
Patients of homocystinuria have thromboembolic tendencies. So
Yes,
what
ma'am.
did you do to prevent it?
Ma'am, first of all, her pre-anesthetic medications, like she has to be treated with dipyrimidol, acid, and a well-hydrated condition should be kept. And she should be ambulated as early as possible, so that there are no thromboembolic event following that. And even like while weaning off anesthesia, she has to be given, if possible, one shot of antiplatelet is given post-operatively.
Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Dr. Akanksha, you said at the end, the patient, when she came back, had a vision of 624, and then
Yes, sir.
some refractive correction was done. So what
Yes,
was
sir.
the vision after the refractive correction?
So she improved till 6/12.
Okay, and the last question is, what is the difference between refractory and refractive?
As it's I didn't.
In one of your slides, you said something about some refractory reasons for the patient having less vision. And then somewhere else you said that refractive correction was done. So is there some difference between refractory and refractive?
Refractive is the sorry, sir.
When do you say it is refractory?
Usually,
You seem to have used those words interchangeably in your slides. So if you go back and look at them,
yes, sir.
and look at where you find the word refractory and see whether it is correct in context.
In
yes.
correction, in connection to glaucoma, we say it is a refractory glaucoma. When do you say refractory?
Refractory,
There's a
as in
clue.
which is not responding to
Amenable.
treatment.
amenable, right? So that is what I think sir is asking.
Yeah,
I think so, right, sir?
sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions from the judges?
Done. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Akanksha. So our
Thank you,
next
ma'am.
speaker is speaker number 7, Dr. Kuntal Patel, who's
Yes, ma'am.
presenting a case of choroidal metastasis and
Hello.
over
Hello.
to you, Dr. Kuntal. Please start sharing your screen.
Yes, ma'am. Is my screen visible, ma'am?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. Good morning, teachers, colleagues, and seniors. I'm presenting a case of choroidal metastasis and brain metastasis from esophageal squamous cell carcinoma, and I don't have any financial interest in presenting this case. So, introduction. Malignant choroidal tumors are usually rare, and most of them are metastatic from distant organs like lungs and breast mostly. Esophageal cancer itself is one of the aggressive tumor, and about 39% of the patients have distant metastasis at the time of diagnosis itself. So most common reported site of metastasis from esophageal cancers are lymph nodes, lungs, liver, and bones. Esophageal cancer metastasis to the orbit have been reported. However, choroidal involvement from esophageal cancer is extremely rare. Coming on to the purpose of this study is to report a rare association of choroidal metastasis with brain metastasis in a patient with primary esophageal squamous cell carcinoma and its management. So coming on to the patient, a 37-year-old male patient presented with the complaints of headache and diminution of vision in left eye since last 1 week. Patient is a known case of squamous cell carcinoma of esophagus for which he had already received treatment. Best corrected visual acuity in right eye was 6.6 and left eye was 6.9. Intraocular pressure in both eyes was 10 millimeter of mercury, and anterior segment examination was normal and unremarkable. Coming on to the fundus picture. So both eyes showed disc edema, and the left eye showed vertical folds at the macula with elevated yellow choroidal lesion temporal to the macula with overlying RP changes and overlying subretinal fluid accumulation. OCT was done, and right eye showed normal foveal contour, and left eye showed subfoveal and subretinal fluid accumulation. Following this, FFA was done, which showed both eyes disc leakage, and left eye showed hyperfluorescence in the late venous phase, which corresponds to the choroidal lesion. CEMRI of the patient was done as patient complained of headache and vomiting, which revealed multiple brain metastases. So patient was planned for whole brain radiation therapy, and 30 grays, 30 gray in 10 fractions over 2 weeks of radiation was delivered to the whole brain, including the choroidal metastasis. So these are the pre and post treatment images. So here we can see the OCT scan through the lesion in the temporal quadrant of the left eye before the treatment, which showed choroidal elevation with shaggy photoreceptors overlying the subretinal fluid, and it is temporal to the macula. And after treatment, there is resolution of the choroidal elevation and also resolution of the subretinal fluid. B scan of the left eye showed choroidal mass, which was moderate to high internal reflectivity in the temporal quadrant, and post treatment we can show decrease in the size of the choroidal mass. These are the pictures of pre and post treatment of the fundus. We can show resolution of the, we can see the resolution of the disc edema, and also the choroidal lesion is resolved with overlying RP changes after treatment, and also subretinal fluid is also resolved, and right eye showed normal foveal contour, and left eye also showed resolution of subfoveal and subretinal fluid after the treatment. So patient is now on regular follow-up since last 6 months and has no symptoms of any choroidal metastasis or brain metastasis. So coming on to the discussion, the most common site of metastasis in the eye is choroid, as it is highly vascular structure. However, choroidal involvement from esophageal tumor is extremely rare. Symptoms of choroidal metastasis are mainly blurred vision, flashes and floaters, and pain in the affected eye. Management is of the choroidal metastasis is not standardized and basically depends on the primary tumor site, histopathological examination, extent and burden of the extrachoroidal metastasis, performance status of the patient, and overall prognosis of the patient. Standard fractionated external beam radiotherapy is the most commonly used modality to treat the choroidal metastasis, which yields complete resolution in up to 80% of the patients and improvement of visual acuity in 57 to 89% of the patients. So the dose recommended is either 30 gray in 10 fractions or 40 gray in 20 fractions over 2 weeks. The standard dose of 3 gray per fraction over 2 weeks is usually used. So a palliative approach with whole brain radiotherapy is preferred where the field of the radiation is extended to include the choroidal metastasis, and the same was done for our patient. Other sites of radiation therapy like plaque brachytherapy, stereotactic radiosurgery, and proton beams therapy, in which protons are used, have been also been used for choroidal
You have 30
mets,
seconds left.
but the results are variable. So coming on to the conclusion, the case basically highlights the rare association of choroidal metastasis in a patient with primary esophageal squamous cell carcinoma, and a careful ophthalmic examination plays an important role in diagnosis this kind of cases, and timely intervention can prevent vision loss. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kuntal. Over to the judges.
In this case, you showed some degree of disc edema.
Yes, sir.
Why do you think the disc edema occurred?
So the disc edema was basically due to brain metastasis, and patient also had a complaint of headache and vomiting. So that might be the case of raised intracranial pressure, raised ICD.
Do you have the pic of brain MRI showing secondary metastasis?
Ma'am, actually,
It's
ma'am,
not-
yes, ma'am, the patient, there was a CD available with the patient, but the patient lost the CD. So
this was in correlation to Dr. Bhatti sir's question of disc edema.
yes, yes, ma'am. Ma'am, patient had brain the films were available, but actually, ma'am, the quality of the film was not good, and the disc of the CD of the MRI was lost by the patient. But there were brain metastases.
If there weren't any brain, if
yes,
there
sir.
were not any brain metastasis and no papilledema, would that have changed your choice of treatment for the choroidal metastasis?
Yes, sir. Means just for the in cases of choroidal metastasis, we can go for plaque brachytherapy, or maybe a plaque brachytherapy, or maybe stereotactic radiosurgery, which gives the radiation just to the tumor of the choroid, or any there is tomotherapy kind of thing is also there, which radiation oncologists use for the treatment. We can go for that, but basically mostly such kind of patients there are always there will be brain metastasis, so multiple site metastasis will be there. So the studies show that mostly whole brain RT has been the modality of the choice.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Kuntal,
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have the ICG facility there?
ICG, no, ma'am, no.
Angiography. Okay.
No, ma'am, no. ICG, indocyanine green. No, no.
Okay.
Any complications due to radiation in ophthalmic when this patient was treated?
Sir, complications are basically, sir, cataract, radiation-induced cataract can be there.
This patient, you said everything got resolved and then patient came back normal.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Patient was young, and since 6 months, we did not have, we have not seen any complications like cataract or any other retinopathy or any means radiation-induced damage to the eye.
This patient, the diagnosis of carcinoma was already known, and when the patient came to you, you examined the patient and you found out the retinal findings, right?
Yes, yes, sir. Basically, patient came to us for the evaluation of raised ICT, and we found the choroidal metastasis on the fundus.
You said it is rare. So how rare it is for the esophageal malignancies to metastasize in eye itself?
Sir, quite rare, sir. So I read means a paper before in 2015. There were, I think, around 8 to 9 cases means diagnosed. Means quite rare, sir. Means total. Basically, we consulted with the radiation oncologists also, and they also told that around 10 to 15 total cases have been reported till date.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Kuntal.
Thank you, ma'am.
Next, we have Dr. Vilasini presenting a clinical study of eyelid tumors. Dr. Vilasini? Dr. Vilasini, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Please start sharing your screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Over to you.
Sumit,
Is my screen visible, ma'am?
Yes, it's visible.
Can I start, ma'am?
Yes, please start.
Good morning. My presentation is a study on lid tumors. Abstract. To aim to study the incidence of eyelid tumor and to analyze the outcome following the treatment. Materials and methods. Prospective study of 40 patients with benign and malignant eyelid neoplasm. Results: among 40 cases, benign tumors are more common than malignant tumor. The most common benign tumor was squamous papilloma. Among malignant tumors, sebaceous gland carcinoma was more common. All benign tumor underwent excision, and for malignant tumor, wide local excision with a 4 to 5 mm margin clearance followed by lid reconstruction was done. Conclusion: histopathology examination for all excised lid lesion has to be done, as an innocuous looking lesion might be malignant. Early clinical diagnosis of malignant tumor with histopathologic confirmation and wide surgical excision of the tumor with appropriate reconstruction yields good functional and cosmetic outcome. Materials and methods. This is a prospective study conducted at Orbit and Oculoplasty Department, Regional Institute of Ophthalmology, EGMO, Chennai for a period of 1 year. Methodology: detailed history including onset, duration, progression, associated features, site of involvement, history of comorbidities, past history of medical and surgical treatment were noted. Ocular examination including size, shape, location, extent, and margins of the ulcer or swelling. Features suggestive of malignancy such as distortion of normal architecture of eyelid margin, loss of cilia, elevated purely telangiectatic margin, enlarging pigmented irregular lesion, indurated area, and lymph node examination was done. For larger lesion or if globe or orbital infiltration is suspected, MRI or CT scan, brain and orbit was done. Biopsy, either excision or incision, was done for all tumors and sent for histopathological examination. It is confirmed as the malignant tumor by HPE wide excision with 4 to 5 mm margin clearance was done, and eyelid reconstruction was done according to the percentage of the defect. Patient with the globe or orbital invasion were referred to oncology department for tumor board clearance, and extensive procedures like excision was done as per advice of tumor board. Patients who required adjuvant radiotherapy and chemotherapy were referred. All patients were followed up for a period of 1 year. In age distribution of patient, the benign being more in the 30 to 40 years group and malignant more than 60 years. In sex distribution of patient, male the benign is more common. In female, the malignancy is more common. Age and sex distribution of malignant tumors: basal cell carcinoma is in the age of 55 to 85 years, and sebaceous cell carcinoma in the age of 35 to 85 years, which was more in number.
The incidence of sebaceous gland is more among female as compared to male. It corroborates with our study. The lid involvement, upper lid benign was more, in lower lid malignant was more. It was similar to other studies. In benign versus malignant, the benign tumor are more than malignant tumor. This is comparable with the other studies. The incidence of benign tumor, squamous cell papilloma was more, followed by pyogenic, the least being capillary hemangioma. The incidence of malignant tumor, in our study, sebaceous cell carcinoma is the most common malignant tumor. Clinical presentation of malignant tumor. In sebaceous gland carcinoma, ulcerative growth was the most common presentation, but among all malignant tumor, nodule was the most common presentation. In periocular and orbital infiltration, sebaceous gland carcinoma showing the more infiltration. In lymph node involvement, sebaceous gland carcinoma showed more involvement. For benign tumor, the treatment was simple excision, sent for histopathological examination. Direct closure provided good cosmetic outcome. In our study, one case of capillary hemangioma was managed with a systemic and topical beta blocker. The child was started with the oral propranolol 1 mg per kg body weight and a topical 0.5 timolol eye drops twice a day. After obtaining opinion and fitness from pediatrician and cardiologist, it was reviewed once in 3 months. The lesion started regressing after 4 months. Marginal shave excision was done in 5 cases of pyogenic granuloma. This is a picture showing capillary hemangioma. The management of malignant tumor, sebaceous gland carcinoma, excision with the primary closure was done for 1 patient, 10 cell advancement flap for 1, Cutler-Bear technique for 1, glabellar flap for 1, and excentration was done for 2 cases. Basal cell carcinoma, Hughes tarsoconjunctival flap for 1, excentration for 1, radiotherapy for 1, squamous cell carcinoma, 10 cell advancement flap for 1, Hughes tarsoconjunctival flap for 1. The most common treatment being the primary closure. In all cases of malignant tumor, wide local excision with the 4 to 5 mm margin clearance was done and specimen sent for histopathological examination. One case, the sebaceous cell carcinoma involving 30% of the lid tumor was excised and direct closure done. One case of sebaceous cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma involving the lateral aspect of the lower lid was repaired after excision with the 10 cell lateral advancement plan. This is showing the preoperative and the postoperative picture. In one case of sebaceous gland carcinoma with diffuse thickening of the whole of the upper lid, the tumor was excised and defect closed with Cutler-Bear technique. This is the picture showing the intraoperative period. The secondary reconstruction was done after 2 months. In one case of meibomian carcinoma involving medial aspect of the lower lid, excision of the tumor was done and was repaired with the defect repaired with the glabellar rotation flap. This is showing the intraoperative and the postoperative picture. In one case of squamous cell carcinoma and basal cell carcinoma, Hughes tarsoconjunctival flap was performed. This is showing the preoperative and the postoperative picture. In one case of basal cell carcinoma, it's managed with a fixed flap elsewhere. It was referred to us and it was advised the excentration by the tumor board. 2 cases of sebaceous cell carcinoma and 1 case of basal cell carcinoma with orbital infiltration underwent orbital excentration. 1 case of advanced sebaceous cell carcinoma presented to us with infiltration of globe and orbit was advised excentration as a primary procedure. The patient was not willing and lost follow-up after that discussion. Out of the 40 patients, 28 patients had a benign eyelid tumor, 12 patients has malignant eyelid tumor. The mean age of presentation of malignant eyelid tumor was 59 years. The malignant tumor incidence was more in female. Benign tumors are more commonly found in the male patient.
Doctor?
Yes, ma'am. The patients were treated accordingly to the defect. In conclusion, all the cases, the histopathological examination has to be done. With the early diagnosis and management, a good outcome can be obtained. Thank you.
Over to the judges.
Rasini, wanted to ask what was the total follow-up of all these patients? How many?
The patients were followed every month, sir, for 1 year period.
I wanted to ask what is something unique about this study basically? You just wanted to study whatever patients with eyelid tumors, they were being treated and out of which how many were malignant, how many were benign, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So you thought that according to your study, sebaceous gland carcinoma is the commonest malignant tumor in your study?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Any specific histopathological findings in your case in sebaceous gland carcinomas?
sebaceous cell carcinoma, the presentation will be, the vascularity will be more, sir.
Okay. Were there recurrent lesion patients or repeatedly operated late tumors?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It was with recurrence, sir, the history.
None of the eyelid tumors had any distant metastasis or any into regional lymph nodes?
Yes, sir. Three cases showed a lymph node involvement, sir.
Okay. So what did you do in these cases?
Sir, we did a total excentration, sir.
Okay.
Actually, for all the cases, we did a CT and a MRI. If we suspected a malignancy, we did a MRI and a CT brain and orbit. And the total excentration was that after getting a clearance from the tumor board of Rajiv Gandhi Hospital, Chennai, sir.
Right.
After excentration, the patients were also referred back post-operatively. And if any lesions were there, they were treated with adjuvant chemotherapy and radiotherapy, sir.
Thank you.
Lasini,
Yes, ma'am.
yeah, did you have any facility of frozen sections in your institute?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Okay. What is the advantage of that?
Ma'am,
would it have been beneficial to your patients?
Yes, ma'am. Because the adjuvant therapy would be curtailed, ma'am. Then and there we can find out whether the excision was clear, the margin excision was cleared or not. And the defect would have been closed, ma'am. But since we did not have a frozen section, the specimen was marked, ma'am, and sent for histopathological examination. We closed the primary defect then and there. And when after some 10 days only, we will get the result, ma'am. So if the margin was not clear, adjuvant therapy was advised, ma'am.
Okay. You did exentration in 2 cases, you said.
Yes, ma'am.
Apart from exentration, any other palliative therapy you started for those patients?
No, ma'am. No
Anything else you did?
chemotherapy. No chemotherapy was started, ma'am, or radiotherapy was started.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any other questions by the judges? Shall we move on with the next speaker?
Yes, please.
So our next speaker is Dr. Smith Desai, presenting a case of ocular myiasis.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll be sharing my screen now. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'll be presenting a case report. Okay, I'll be presenting a case report of ocular myiasis of a patient presenting in a tertiary care teaching hospital in Ahmedabad. Introduction. Myiasis is the invasion of living or dead human tissue. It could be also be animal tissue by fly larvae. The most common cause is Oestris ovi, the sheep botfly for human ophthalmomyiasis. Ophthalmomyiasis refers to a larval infestation of the eye. It could be an external infection or an internal infection. Ophthalmomyiasis externa refers to infestation of the external ocular structure, including the conjunctiva and the cornea. Ophthalmomyiasis interna refers to intraocular penetration of the larvae. Typically, larvae do not survive long enough to develop into the final second stage in human beings. Case, a 71-year-old female presented to the tertiary care teaching hospital with a complaint of pain, bleeding, and loss of vision in her left eye for 1 month. On examination, the visual acuity in her left eye was nopial and right eye was 660. Slit lamp examination of the right eye showed pseudophakia with age-related corneal degeneration and arcus senilis. Fundus examination of the right eye showed a Cabris ratio of 0.2 with PPA, healthy macula, and a peripheral tessellation. Slit lamp examination of the left eye showed lid margins with a black firm mass with rolled up margins along the lower lid. Differentiation of the cornea and the sclera was not possible. The entire eyeball had devolved into an ulcer with the necrotic tissue and pus forming the floor. The base of the ulcer was formed by residual extraocular muscles in the bony orbit. The margins of the ulcer were tender and were bleeding upon gentle examination. The floor of the tissue was friable. Debridement and dressing was done daily in the septic OT, and a single shot of ivermectin 10 milligrams was given on day 1. The photograph on the right-hand side shows the larvae, which are obtained during the debridement of the patient. For the first 2 sessions, turpentine oil was used to remove all the maggots, and ocular examination was done thoroughly to ensure no parasites were remaining in the wound. Biopsy was taken from the ulcer and was sent to pathology laboratory for ruling out malignancy, and tissue was sent to microlab for entomological analysis. Following the first 2 sessions, debridement was done every day, first with saline followed by betadine solution, and the patient was patched with the betadine gauze. And 6th day onwards, instead of patching the patient with betadine, we use an eye shield. On the right side, we can see a photograph. We're actually retrieving the larvae. This photograph is showing the patient's eye after 5 days of dressing. CCT brain and orbit showed a 14 by 20 by 24 mm hyperdense lesion of the left eye, predominantly on the lateral aspect with severe destruction of the left eye, failure to discriminate the lens in the cornea in the CT itself. Periorbital, intracorneal, as well as extracorneal compartment showed reactive haziness. There was also some post-contrast enhancement, and mild ptosis was noted. Discussion. In history, we ruled out close contact with some animals like sheep or goat. In ophthalmomyiasis externa, the patient may have a history of sudden onset of pain, burning, itching, lacrimation, foreign body sensation, rhinorrhea and chemosis, even mimicking conjunctivitis. In ophthalmomyiasis interna, the patients have reported symptoms including photopsia, floaters, and lines to their visual field, as well as some pain. Slit lamp examination in ophthalmomyiasis externa, it may reveal small translucent larvae, mucopolon conjunctivitis, or even a corneal ulcer. Larval tracts are often apparent in the cases of ophthalmomyiasis interna. The larvae may be visible on biomicroscopy in the anterior chamber, the subretinal space, or even in the vitreous. OCT imaging through the tract may reveal subretinal tunnels. Management. In ophthalmomyiasis externa, the mainstay is removal of the larvae, often at the slit lamp with topical analgesia and antibiotics. Sometimes it may be difficult because of strong attachment to the tissue by their hooks and stipules. Ivermectin has shown some benefit as therapy, even prophylactic treatment of the livestock. Management of ophthalmomyiasis interna. Immediate photocoagulation is recommended if the organism can be identified. Sometimes it can be in the macular region. In that situation, we can use a bright beam of the eye to herd the organism into a safer area for the photocoagulation. Following photocoagulation, there is a risk of significant inflammation, which can be controlled by steroids, topical, intraocular, or systemic steroids. And photocoagulation, if not possible, then we can consider PPV. Anti-helminthine medications have not been reported in a lot of success for ophthalmomyiasis interna and externa. These are my references. Thank you.
Over to the judges.
Smith,
Yes, sir.
do you have any pre-treatment photographs on the slit lamp or even use CT scan photographs in?
No, sir.
That would have been more informative rather than the post because
Post, yes, sir.
you told all the manifestations of this condition, out of
Yes.
which what specifically was there in your case? What makes this case more unique?
Sir, the patient was actually complaining that like she had loss of vision for 1 month, but clinically looking at the picture, she must have had this situation for a long time. Because when we send the tissue for pathological examination, the patho lab actually confirmed with immunohistochemistry that she actually had BCC. So first thing was the history. The history was for a long time. And when the patient came to us for the very first time and we started the debridement, we could actually see the larvae without the use of turpentine oil itself.
What was the follow-up of the patient?
So we kept the patient for 5 days. And after we got confirmation from the histological lab that she actually had basal cell carcinoma, so we referred her to a higher center because we don't have interventional radiology and oncosurgeons in our hospital.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Dr. Smith, was ivermectin given systemically?
Yes, ma'am. A single shot of ivermectin was given on the first day, 10 milligrams, according to the regimen of 0.2 mg per kg.
Okay. It would have been really better if there was the pre-op picture, you know, as Dr.
Yes.
Avinash said. I was
Yes,
also
yes.
hunting whether I missed it somewhere.
Yes, actually. Oh, I had it in the older phone, but I couldn't find it.
Okay, okay.
Yes.
This is what you learn, right?
Yes.
And how is the patient doing now?
The patient, we saw the patient 3 months ago, and she was being treated with chemotherapy. And like she was explained by the radiologist and the oncosurgeons that the tumor is like we cannot operate it surgically at this point given her age and condition, and she is being treated with chemotherapy and she's doing okay.
Okay. Suppose this patient did not have involvement of internal structures or the eyeball. How would you have treated this patient differently? If it was only external, ocular mass is external.
Ma'am, I think we would have like continued systemic ivermectin for 4 to 5 days, and in combination with that, like dressing, what we've done, we would have done that every day, and we would have explained to the patient the importance
Betadine
of.
dressing, you say betadine dressing?
For the first 2 days, we
The
used
eye is normal. The eye is normal.
Yeah.
What
We can irrigate the eye
would you
with.
like to take?
Yeah, we would like to irrigate the eye with some topical anesthesia, and after that, we would have done the dressing because.
Dr. Smith,
Yes, sir.
would it not have been better by physically removing it?
Yes, and so what we did was like we did both. We physically removed the larvae with the help of the forceps, and we also irrigated with turpentine oil.
So when the eyeball is intact, would you like to use this also? Turpentine oil?
No.
No, that's what I'm asking.
Yes, sir.
How will you treat it differently?
Irrigation with copious amounts
now
of
that
saline.
the eyeball was not intact, it was affected. You went and did everything possible.
Yes.
So yeah. On the other hand, if the eyeball was intact, what precautions you would have taken to salvage it?
Some copious amounts of saline, and like if we are using forceps, then like use it very judiciously near the lid margins, quite away from the sclera and the cornea.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Yes.
Dr. Smith, what was the reason why the other eye vision was so poor?
So the patient was illiterate and she was not actually able to understand the charts and the symbols. Fundus and everything was okay. So we asked the relatives if she had a complaint of poor vision in the eye from the beginning, but they said that like she's not been used to intricate vision testing. So she's been staying in rural areas and she's been working in a small room household work. So they don't really know if she had a poor vision prior to the hospital visit. This is the first time she actually came to an ophthalmologist. We even went and did an OCT. The OCT was also normal of the right eye.
So that means you expect that the vision was probably better, except that you couldn't record it.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Any other questions from judges?
No, I'm done.
Yeah, nothing from me either.
Nothing. Yeah. Thank you so much.